Welcome to the fourth week of Lent, the fourth of 6 weeks. Lent is a season of the church calendar in which we seek to create space to encounter God. We do this by giving up or taking up. Giving up what can distract us to create space for us to hear from and respond to God, and taking up practices that ground us and realign us and increase our attention to God's voice. Every year, our prayer is together as a community from Ash Wednesday to Easter Sunday. We will be more intentional in creating that space and encountering God our Father. This year, we specifically wanted to engage in Lent through the lens of finding rest for our souls, based on this wonderful word from Jesus that comes from Matthew 11, where he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So we've been spending Lent talking about the things that prevent us from rest, as those are the things that tend to prevent us from connecting to God. We previously talked about perfectionism and worry, and last week we talked about apathy. This week, we are talking about busyness. Not business, busyness. I can't tell you how many times I was typing this and I kept accidentally spelling business, and that would make for a kind of a funny talk. But we're talking about busyness. What is busyness? I think that's we all kind of know what that is, right? When we have our schedules filled to the brim, when we're constantly always doing something, when there's just zero margin in our lives, yet somehow we just keep saying yes to more and more. We have no time, it feels like, for anything. And when asked, "How are you?" the common reply is busy. I'm busy. Have you ever had one of those seasons? I'm sure you have. When everything's just packed to the gills and it feels like you wake up and just go and go and go, and then the next thing you know, you're waking up again and starting it all over again, day in and day out. Maybe you find yourself in a season like that right now. Why do we do this to ourselves? How do we get in these situations? I think there's a number of reasons why, but I think sometimes it's easier to say yes to anything and everything than risk offending or disappointing others. I think sometimes we have a desire to appear important or full or altogether or significant. I think sometimes we run into seasons of busyness where things have gotten too full because we're striving for affirmation or to find our value and sense of self-worth in what we produce. And all three of those reasons are very similar to perfectionism that we talked about 3 weeks ago. And if that describes you at all, I would love for you to go back and listen to that talk from the beginning of Lent. But there's another aspect of busyness that I want to talk about tonight that I first learned during one of the busiest, well, not during, but from one of the busiest seasons of my life. My freshman year of college, I attended Baylor University in Waco, Texas. This was almost 20 years ago, so it was a lot different then, but I don't recommend it, personally. It was a rough year of my life, and there was a lot of reasons why, but by the second semester of my freshman year, I was so depressed and apathetic that I was sleeping 20 hours a day. I would wake up at 5 p.m., I would go get dinner with my roommates, and then I would come back home and be asleep by 9. Once I came home, I moved back and quit Baylor. I don't think that's the right word. I transferred to CU, Denver, to finish out my school because I just didn't like Texas. Texas and I didn't get along, still don't. And if you're from Texas, I love you, and you're accepted here just as you are, and I don't hold that against you. Some of my favorite people in the world are from Texas. I just didn't care for it. Dustin, I love you. I love you. And look, you're here, so you knew. I came back home and just felt lost. And I was a couple weeks into being home. I was talking to my mom and just talking about how depressed and, I don't know, directionless I felt. And she said to me with the purest intentions, you need to go do something. You got to get outside of yourself. You need to go volunteer or work or just do something to care about other people. which was great advice. And I at the time even thought, I think there's something to that. And so I already had a full-time kind of summer job at a loan management company, which sounds as boring as is as boring as it sounds. But within a couple weeks, I had gotten a second job at a church on the weekends. I started interning at the church that I grew up in their youth group. Soon school started, so I was at full-time school, and I thought it'd be a good idea to also get another job at another church, leading worship on Wednesday nights. I started attending here again, like full-time, so I was here every Tuesday night. So literally every single night of the week, I had something going on, and my days were full either with school or work or both. And so I would leave my apartment at like 6 a.m., and I would get back home at like 10 or 11, and I was just constantly going, constantly moving. But I never felt any more direction or any more peace than I had when I was depressed and apathetic. I think that I had hoped that maybe if I filled my life to the brim, I could avoid all of the ways that I was falling apart that had put me in that depressed or apathetic state. And spoiler alert, it didn't work. It just led to a deeper spiral of burnout and apathy than I had experienced previously. But looking back, I've been able to see what was really going on in that season. I was filling my life with as much as I possibly could in order to avoid my life. Busyness, I think, is often the opposite side of the coin of apathy that we talked about last week. When we're apathetic, we shut down as a way to protect ourselves from pain. Busyness is a very similar adjacent approach to that same problem. Busyness keeps us constantly distracted to avoid the problem. Busyness is just avoidance. I think you can think of it as, sometimes when kids don't want to listen to something, they will just cover their ears and close their eyes and say, like, I can't hear you, over and over and over again. I don't know if you've ever run into that. It's super fun. Busyness is just a socially acceptable way for adults to do the exact same thing. It's just walking around with your ears plugged and your eyes closed saying, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. But it's not fine. We're drowning in hurried activity and losing control of our lives and losing control of any sense of connection to God, whom we're sure is disappointed in us. Busyness is often a way for us to avoid deeper, more painful things in life. Because if we never allow ourselves to actually slow down and be still, we never have to confront our shame or our wounds or our darkness. We never have to confront our addictions or our patterns of destructive behavior that we feel enslaved to. Sometimes the only way it feels like to get out of them is to just distract ourselves so much that we don't even have to think about it anymore. We never have to address the sadness or pain that we carry. We get to avoid all of that. But in doing so, despite all of the hurried activity, we essentially avoid our lives. Jesus in John 15 says, live in me. Make your home in me just as I do in you. In the same way that a branch can't bear grapes by itself, but only by being joined to the vine, you can't bear fruit unless you're joined to me. I'm the vine, you are the branches. When you're joined with me and I with you, the relation intimate and organic, the harvest is sure to be abundant. Separated, you can't produce a thing. Anyone who separates from me is dead wood, gathered up and thrown on the bonfire. So Jesus literally says, metaphorically says, that the only way for us to bear fruit, the only ways for our lives to bear fruit is to remain connected to him. Busyness is really tricky because it lets us appear to everybody else that we are very connected, deeply connected to so many different things that are going on. All while we are just completely disconnected from the source of life, from ourselves, and from anyone else. Remaining connected to Jesus takes intentionality and it takes time. And those are two things, intentionality and time, that we don't have when we're constantly going from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, constantly distracting ourselves from any moment of reflection or deep processing or connection. So what do we do about that? Again, during this series, I'm trying to offer simple practices to start to help getting out of or giving up whatever distraction or thing that prevents us from rest that we're talking about this week. But I don't want it to seem like these are just like easy things to just implement and, oh, you're done and everything's fine. If it were that easy, you wouldn't be in the position that you were in with zero time and a schedule so full that every time you realize that you're just waking up to start the day over again. But I think these are things that begin to give us handles to push into what life could look like with rest and connection to God without these things taking over our lives. So what are ways for us to begin to give up busyness? I think an easy first one is commit to a season of saying no. I often hear a lot about people committing to a season of saying yes to whatever comes into their life, which is great. I mean, often more than not, that's what I need to do. But I think it's just as valid to set some boundaries for yourself and give yourself permission to say no for a season of time. I had a friend that was just so overcommitted that they just decided for a year they were going to say no to anything that new that was offered to them. And it was interesting how quickly they started to love it, but how awkward and weird it was at first to just tell people like, no, and I'm sorry, I don't have a reason for you beyond I'm just not doing anything new this year. My friend was honestly surprised how okay with that most people are. A lot of times, like I said earlier, we're scared to offend or disappoint people by saying no. And if you just tell people like, my life's too full right now, I'm just trying to scale back a little bit, you'll be surprised how open people are to that. And often they're like, wow, that's a really great idea. I should probably do that same thing. So the first is just commit to a season of saying no. Don't take on anything new. Quit trying to please other people. Reclaim your life. The second, this is a practice that we've been talking about for pretty much every week this series, but practice Sabbath. Did I say this is a Sabbath we've been talking about? It doesn't matter. Practice Sabbath. And these are the points that I've put up every single week, but we're going to alter it a little bit for this week. But they are pick a day to just be off of social media completely. Pick 3 to 4 hours of that day to be completely screen-free. And during that time, plan some things that you enjoy to do. The idea is to keep it simple so that you'll actually do it and not overcomplicate it. But when you are stuck in busyness, if you set aside a day for yourself, particularly 3 to 4 hours to just do something you enjoy, you're going to fill it up with stuff. That's just your natural inclination is to go, 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 which is why you're in the position that you're in. So as part of your Sabbath practice, but it's its own practice in and of itself, incorporate stillness, silence, and solitude into your life, which again is far easier for me to just say than it is to do. But work up to spending an hour, at least 60 minutes, not doing anything, being still, being silent, and if you can, get away by yourself. You can spend this time writing or processing, but you need to set aside the time to be alone and silent and still, to give yourself space to just be alone with your thoughts and to give yourself the space to be alone with God. Again, process, reflect, write, whatever helps you connect to what's actually going on inside of you and God. This is going to be really scary if you're avoiding something. But I think if you can slowly push into this and slowly slow down, it will bear fruit in your life. And finally, this isn't so much a practice as just something I want to encourage you to do, and probably seems really obvious, but you have to face head on what you're avoiding. And it's going to take, oftentimes, some time of scaling things back and giving yourself space to process and sort out what that is. But at the end of the day, whatever you're filling your life to avoid is not going to go away by you covering your ears and closing your eyes and saying, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. I want to encourage you to quit running yourself into the ground. Quit wasting your life avoiding whatever it is. Because at the end of your life, it's still going to be there. And I don't want you to look back and say, like, I've spent my life avoiding this thing and it's still, like, for what? Obviously, that thing is overwhelming or you wouldn't be avoiding it. And I'm not saying this will be easy. It won't. Quite frankly, it won't. For me, during that season that I was telling you about, I was absolutely avoiding an addiction that I just did not want to admit that I had and did not know how to begin to even do anything about. But I did eventually. And it ended up not being this huge, scary thing. It was super hard. But I was strong enough to do it with help. Whatever's going on in your life is not too big for you to handle, especially with the help of friends or pastors or counselors. Your life is worth pushing into how hard it will be to overcome the thing that you're avoiding. And you will enjoy your life so much more on the other side of it. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This is what Jesus calls us to. He doesn't need you to do a million things every day, all day. Something I forgot to say is we can often fill our lives with this busyness that feels very spiritual or feels very tuned into God. I was working at 4 churches at once. Don't ever do that, by the way. But I was completely disconnected from God. But on the outside, all people saw was this person that was super involved in all these different spiritual things, all these different churchy opportunities that didn't do anything for me. Busyness, filling our lives with constant doing, constant going, constant moving, tends to be us filling our lives with constant distraction to avoid ourselves and others and God. But we can reclaim our lives by being committed to quit avoiding and instead face head on whatever it is that we're destroying ourselves by running from. When we choose to say no to busyness, when we choose to quit avoiding our pain, we'll rediscover connection to ourselves and to others and to the God who created us to be so much more than a little Energizer bunny constantly going. And we'll find rest for our souls. Would you pray with me? God, thank you for constant reminders that we are limited people that need rest. God, I pray that all of us who are suffering from busyness would have the courage and will to begin to say no. To stop running, to stop distracting ourselves, to stop being scared and instead reach out reach out to receive the grace that you give us, and to reach out to receive life rather than running from it. God, thank you for this church and this community and this time that we get to gather every week together to remember who you are and who you've created us to be. We love you, God. Amen.